welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. Night Owls of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing that has happened to you while everyone else was sleeping? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
When I was about 12 to 13, I was laying in bed reading one night when I looked up and saw what looked like a man's head and neck lean into my room from near the ceiling on the outside wall. I say it looked like a man because it looked like really bad 90s CGI. The skin was smooth, plastic looking, and too orange. His eyes were hollow, making it look mask-like, but there was a deep red light that you could see through the eye holes. It very mechanically panned at a slow, even rate from left to right and then back to center before leaning back out through the wall. Needless to say, I had a really hard time getting to sleep that night. I probably only slept for a couple hours before I heard my parents stirring around in the kitchen. The phone was also ringing way too much for how early in the morning it was, so I left my room and asked what was going on. Apparently, my uncle had gone missing the previous night after coming out to hunt on our land. His body was found hanging over a barbed wire fence at the back of our property later that morning. In retrospect, the weird face did eerily resemble his. I've never spoken to my family about it. I was in a call with my girlfriend one night a month or so ago and had fallen asleep. The next morning, she tells me she heard someone walking around on my side of the call, a door closing, and someone talking to me. Apparently, she tried waking me up, even yelling for me to try to get up, but I was fast asleep. I asked my family the next morning, and none of them were awake or in my room at any point that night, so I'm still not sure what she heard. I was pulling an all-nighter when I was in high school because I had an essay that I didn't start until the last minute. I was home alone that week because everyone was out of town. I was in my room typing on my computer and listening to music at full blast when, out of nowhere, I heard my name coming from the kitchen. Now, my room was next to the kitchen, so I definitely knew it came from there. It was also loud enough to be able to hear it over the speakers. So I walk to the kitchen, and as soon as I do, this cooking pan falls off the kitchen sink. Not gonna lie, it made me jump, and I immediately turned on the lights. Obviously, there was no one there, and it could have been my imagination and a coincidence that the pan fell. But I turned on all the lights in the house just in case.
Hi, Dad here again. Maybe if you started your paper earlier and didn't pull an all-nighter, you could have avoided this paranormal experience.
My room used to be in the basement. I lived in a too-small house with my separated parents, brother, aunt, uncle, grandma, and cousin. The basement had concrete walls and one high off-ground small window. So I put my bed as close to the stairs as possible and bought a space heater. But anyways, I still had trouble sleeping there, so I'd lay awake at night. One night I heard a weird sound. I heard a sort of squish noise and a deep groan down in the basement with me, so I turned on my lamp that didn't quite light the entire room. I got up and was shaking with fear and was like, "Hello?" No response, but no way was I gonna sleep down there, so I grabbed my pillow and booked it out of there. But as I was going up the stairs, the sound came again, but extremely loud. It woke my brother in the living room. I've never felt more fear than I did right then. It's hard to describe the sounds. It was like a deep yell groan. When I went to visit my boyfriend at the time in Long Island, New York, for the first time, I stayed at his house. Because his parents were old school, they didn't let us sleep in the same bedroom, so they accommodated me in the den. Mind you, the den is below the house and is just a few steps above the basement. I woke up facing the wall, and he felt the other side of the bed sink, as if someone had sat down on the bed, and the room was suddenly really cold. I got the hell out of there and made him switch rooms. Something was off. Found out later, his grandma had died a few months prior. She lived, slept, and died in that same den. Hearing people say my name, or one time when my brother lived with us and we had shared a room, both sleeping on mattresses on the floor. I had dressers down the middle of the room to separate my side from his. Something dragging its long, dark hair across the floor, and its head slumped down crawled towards me. It was my brother. He was sleep crawling. A few years ago, I was on a camping trip with some friends. It was my first time camping in an RV. I have to say, it doesn't really feel like camping. More like a really comfy extended road trip, but I was glad we had the RV that night. I was up late browsing through Reddit as you do when, through my open window, I heard someone open one of the compartments on the outside of the RV. Thinking it was my friend Josh, who was bunked over by the outside door, I whispered, asking if he wanted to have a beer and go down to the creek. Instead of responding, I heard the gravel crunch as he walked around and jiggled the door handle. Thinking he locked himself out, I crawled down from my bunk and put my foot down right into Josh's stomach. He was pissed, yelling at me for not watching where I was going and upset that he was woken up like that. Plus, I kinda think I was dangerously close to stepping on his balls, but neither of us felt the need to broach that subject. I asked him who went outside and he angrily told me to go back to bed, that nobody was outside. So I did, not wanting to continue that unpleasant conversation. On multiple occasions, I swear something has tapped on my window. I'm on the second story. I've also had a few very vivid hallucinations about shadowy men standing at my door just staring at me. Not too long ago, my PC and my PS4 turned on at exactly the same time, and there was no one but me in the room, so I just unplugged them both and went on Reddit for an hour. The light bulb from my lamp exploded, literally shattered, and for a few seconds I was in complete darkness waiting for the demon that did that to kill me or something. Then I used my phone as a flashlight and replaced the bulb. A couple years back, I was staying at my grandparents' house for some reasons. They live in the middle of nowhere, Australia. I was almost asleep when I hear this screeching noise from outside. It sounded far away and way too mechanical to be an animal. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep when I started seeing these flickering purple and red lights out of the window in the corner of my eye. When I properly looked, I didn't see the light, but when I looked away, it was there. I thought that it was lightning or something, but was rather spooked at this point, so I Googled everything. I eventually get out of bed to investigate and go into the kitchen where I would be able to see outside better. I sat in the kitchen for probably 20 minutes not seeing anything. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. In the morning, I found out what had happened. In the area, it's not uncommon for people to steal cars, go for a joyride, and then crash it in an abandoned cane field and set it on fire. The purple lights were the headlights, and the red was the fire. I was walking down my hallway into my kitchen to get a snack. When we were moving at the time, so there was a lot of boxes everywhere. There was one pile so high it almost reached the ceiling. I looked at the pile and saw two glowing eyes. I thought the box was a very tall human. Turns out my cat jumped up there and was just staring at me. Not much, but I thought it was scary at the time. I was up late, or early I guess, a few nights ago, and had my back slider open. My room has a slider entering the backyard and the back porch light on. Some effing random ass dude pokes his head through my curtain, freaks me right the F out. Turns out he's my neighbor. My little brother had left the back gate open and he was asking to pick up his kid's ball before said kid woke up. It wasn't really nuts, but like, why are you effing poking your head into my bedroom?
Behavior like that, in the wrong country, in the wrong town, in the wrong house, could have deadly consequences.
This probably doesn't fit the description of creepy, I don't know. Prefacing this, I am a chronic insomniac prone to bouts of extreme late-night walks. I live in the suburbs of Tokyo. Anyway, I'm off on my rounds. Maybe it's about 2 a.m. I heard cats screaming absolutely in terror. I still can't get over the racket they were making. I searched high and low and couldn't find the source of the noise. Eventually, buried under some thickets and a piece of scrubland, I found a cardboard box taped up with no air holes or vents. It seemed very deliberately done, callous. I scraped off the tape to find two very small kittens inside. Well, don't worry, I told them. I'll take you home with me. Texted my very sleepy wife and explained what happened. She got a spot prepared for them, food, water, etc. I took them to the vet the next day, and he gave them the once-over, gave them the shots, etc. I asked him if I could put an ad in his window, hoping someone would adopt them. Luckily, someone did. Someone knocked on my window at 2 a.m. when I was 13 and home alone. There were 3 knocks coming from my balcony window. It's pretty strange because it was raining like hell. My room is on the 3rd floor, and I don't even have neighbors because I live in a rural area. I can't explain it, but I spent the night being terrified to walk by the window. My husband volunteers for the RFS, Rural Fire Service volunteer firefighter in Australia, and one afternoon I had washed all his gear and hung it out on the clothesline. Went to let the dogs out for a wee about 1 a.m. and the dog started barking really aggressively at something in the backyard. I turned the backlight on to see what looked like an 8-foot man standing dead still staring at me in the backyard. Turned out the backlight caught the reflective parts of his uniform that lit them up to expose what looked like a giant man. I was home alone with the kids at the time and was so terrified, even after I realized, and hardly slept a wink. When my son was a newborn, my husband worked late shifts, which left me home alone. I didn't like to stay on my own at night, so I tended to stay up late in the living room watching TV until he came home after midnight. We lived in a quiet community and were the youngest residents by about 40 years. One night around 9, someone starts feverishly pounding on my back windows. They were hitting them so hard that my walls were shaking. I jumped up and it quit. I had no idea how to explain it. My husband came home and I had him check the back of the house, but there was nothing there. Oddly enough, my son slept through all of this. A few nights later it happened again, only this time it didn't stop when I stood up. It kept going, harder and louder, for nearly 30 seconds. I started yelling, thinking someone was messing with me, and it quit. I called my father-in-law, who lived close by, and asked if he was trying to scare me. He's known as a prankster, and he told me he'd never do something that scary, or do anything to wake up my son that late at night. He asked if he needed to come down, but I didn't want him to think I was some scared city girl afraid to be on her own, so I said no. My own dad came by the next day and set up a punji stick trap in the backyard. Underneath the windows, my husband sat the shotgun out for me. The next time it happened was the worst. It was around 10 p.m. when the banging began, and I'd had enough. I faced the windows and screamed, "I have a gun!" There was a short pause, then the banging began with an intensity it had never had before. It was like someone was trying to knock down the wall. I grabbed the gun and slung open the door, not a great idea in hindsight, and shouted, "Effing try me!" The banging stopped. It never happened again. My husband and I checked the area under the windows out back. None of the traps had been activated. We had several other odd happenings at that house, but nothing ever scared me as badly as that. About a month or two ago, at like 2 in the morning, I got up to get a glass of water when I saw some guy in a black hoodie with something sticking out of his pocket standing in front of my door. I was terrified, so I went and grabbed a knife to defend myself with and locked myself and cats in my room until morning. When I went out into my living room, I saw nothing, and I remembered we had a security camera that showed our front porch. So I showed my roommate and turned it into the police, but they couldn't see his face, so they couldn't do much. Still gives me chills thinking about it. TLDR. Some guy is outside at 2 a.m. with what I think is a knife. I huddle with my cats until morning, turn video surveillance to police. When I was younger, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. I was in 2nd grade, so I usually kept the door open to get light in because I was scared of the dark. My brother would always close the door and refuse to open it because he was bigger and older. I couldn't do anything about it. Well, one night I woke up to a pitch-black bedroom. As my eyes started to adjust, I glanced over to my brother's bed across the room and noticed that he wasn't in it. As I looked across the room, there he was. He was standing right in front of the closed door, just standing still. Since it was really dark, all I could see was his black figure, a silhouette of a little boy. I didn't move a muscle. My brother stood in his position, motionless, for 10 minutes until I dozed off into sleep. To this day, the thought of what he was doing and the look of his motionless dark figure still keeps me up at night.
Little kids standing motionless in a pitch black corner? Yeah, that's a frightening image.
Hearing my guard German Shepherd barking like crazy, he only does that when someone is trespassing. I go out and look through the garden, the place is empty, I go back in, I'm gaming and I hear thump thump. Jump out of the couch and I look outside once more later that night at around 3:19. I see this shadow in my bedroom. I go in and I find my lamp on with no one inside. I keep hearing or seeing weird crap. I might move to the city since I cannot handle the countryside life. Used to live with my ex in a house where something did not like me. It got to the point where every single time I fell asleep downstairs where his room was, I had sleep paralysis. One time we were cuddling, and he fell asleep before I did, and I started hearing growls and stuff. At this point, this was fairly commonplace, so I tried to just ignore it and fall asleep. When I finally did, I had a horrible nightmare that something was pulling me into the closet and beating me. I woke up to sleep paralysis and heard a deep, gravelly voice say, "Come here, sweetheart," from the closet. I stopped sleeping down there after several experiences of seeing things down there while I was sure I was awake too, but That was effing terrifying because I felt so helpless. Another time, more recently, I was in Texas visiting my grandma and everyone was asleep. It was very early in the morning, like 4 a.m., before I finally was asleep. After seemingly just a few minutes, I woke up to my toddler son saying, "No," really loudly and forcefully. Look over, and he's still asleep. Look back to my right, and there is the shadow of a man standing a few feet away from me. I couldn't see well because it was dark, but there was clearly someone in the room. I got confused for a minute and said, "Dad?" thinking maybe he came in for some reason, but then the figure didn't move or say anything, and I realized it wasn't him. I freaked out and reached to turn on the extremely bright night light, and when I turned back, it was gone. I effing hated sleeping there the rest of the time. To make it even worse, I was telling my sister about it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I saw him the first night we were here." Apparently, she was reading in bed and turned over, and he was standing over her bed. My family has always been sensitive to this stuff, and my sister most of all, so she didn't mention it until I told her about what I saw. I've been kind of on the fence for most of my life about these experiences, but that put a bullet through the head of me not believing in the supernatural anymore. When I was 10 to 12 years old, I was sitting in my bedroom at like 3 a.m. No one was awake. I didn't have school the next day, and there wasn't any traffic. I hear a knocking sound from my window, so I look out my window. There wasn't anyone there, so I went back to playing my video games. I'd say about 30 minutes later, I heard the knocking again. I look at my window again, and guess what? No one was there. I ignore it again and go back to playing video games. About an hour or so later, I get up to take a piss. A little context for the next part. My bathroom is a little weird. There's a window right above the toilet with no curtains or blinds. I hear my dogs barking, all three of them, and I look out the window into the backyard to see a man dressed in a hoodie and jeans walking up to my bedroom window. He looks up into the window, I guess seeing the bathroom light on, sees me, and sprints off in the woods. This isn't actually the creepiest thing I've had happen to me. I'm very prone to having paranormal or weird stuff happen to me for some reason, but this story was what popped into my head. TLDR was up around 3 a.m. Weird dude was knocking on my window. I always have my window open at night because of California heat, and one night at around 2 a.m. a sketchy white car parked in front of my house. No one got out, no one got in, and it left about an hour later. Nothing really happened, but the fact that I've seen it around the neighborhood multiple times, and I know they don't live here or anything because my town or neighborhood is very small, freaks me out a lot. The windows are tinted very darkly, and I know it is the same car because of the license plate, so I never really could see who was inside. Still freaks me out a bit when I see it around.